Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we introduce Ryland Fisher, an old activist, also ex-editor of the Cape Times, journalist, and I've known Ryland forever. As part of our family growing up, used to come visit our home. So I've known Ryland for forever. Good morning, Ryland.
Morning.
What I'd like you to do is just tell us a little bit about yourself. It's not about asking questions, it's just who you are. Where did it all start? Where were you born? Who was your parents? That type of thing. And just feel free to mention whatever you want to.
How much time do we? The point is that once you get me going, you're going to struggle to stop me.
It's no problem. You can go. I know you got a lot of stories to tell.
No, I mean, listen, I sometimes people ask me, where did you grow up? And I say, well, how much time do you have? Because I was born in Athlone. Well, I was born at Somerset Hospital while we were living in Athlone. But then after that, we moved to Pokmakiri, Q-Town, Bridgetown, Silvertown, Bonteville, Elsies River, Surrey Estate. We ended up in Hanover Park, where I spent kind of the better part of my formative years, and then we moved to Mitchell's Plain. And I'm sure I've left out one or two places in between. And so it's the reason for that is because we were living in this house in Athlone, and at some point, and I'm not quite clear what happened, we lost the house. My parents then, we were 5 kids, 2 brothers, 2 sisters and me. So I'm the youngest. And my parents, my dad then took my 2 brothers with him to go look for a room for them. And my mother took my sisters and me because it was easier to find a room as opposed to a house. And so in that period, we kind of ended up moving all over and staying all over. And so we would stay at a place for about 3 months until the people got fed up with having to put up with a family, like a woman with 3 kids. And then we would move on to another place and another place and so on. Until eventually we got the one day my family, my mom and my dad called us and said, listen, they've got this letter from the council. They've been offered a house in Hanover Park, which means that we'll be able to live together as a family. And for most people, that's not a big thing, but for us it was huge, having the opportunity to live together as a family again. And so Hanover Park, I don't know, I must have been, at that point I must have been only like 8 or 9 years old, okay? And I'd already kind of lived all over the show. And so then I was able to go to school in Hanover Park and stay. In fact, I think when I got to school in Hanover Park, it was standard 1. And I matriculated in Hanover Park eventually and so on, and went to university from there also. So we lived in Hanover Park for quite a while.
So it was just to intervene, it was a tough life. It wasn't like you'd think, if you look at you now and say, sure, Ryland is doing well for himself. But it was a struggle. It wasn't an easy road.
Yeah, well, it wasn't. It was always, I mean, Hanover Park, Hanover Park is a crazy kind of place. It's very difficult if you grow up in Hanover Park not to get involved in gangs. And sometimes some of my friends or some people, when they meet me and they hear I'm from Hanover Park, and I don't hide the fact that I'm from Hanover Park, I'm very proud of it, because I think I would like to show other young children from Hanover Park that it is possible for you to achieve something in life. And so you need to own where you come from in order to also to be an example to others who come from an area. But so, I mean, Hanover Park gangsterism, I mean, just about everybody I interacted with got involved in gangs. And in fact, I also, when I was a youngster, probably 9, 10 years old, I was the leader of a little gang, area, block of flats, Solent Court. And we used to fight with the kids from Durban Court, which was kind of on the other side of a little open field. And there was Como Court next to us, so we used to fight with those kids. But it was like harmless stuff. We basically wanted to emulate our older brothers and sisters who were in gangs. So we formed our own little gang. Of course, my gang career was short-lived because what happened was we were kind of fighting, and the fights would inevitably, we would be stoning the kids from the other court, and they would stone us back. Sometimes we would chase them, they would chase us back. And eventually we kind of decided, hey, we need to resolve our differences, and the way in which we can resolve the differences is for the leaders to fight against each other. And I was never much of a fighter. Okay? I mean, I kind of led the gang almost like as a manager. I was like good at delegating to the guys. Okay, hey, jy gaan baklei jy.
Ja, jy's 'n goeie baklei, jy kon dit opsom.
That kind of stuff. Anyway, so, but of course nowadays the gang leaders, so I had to go fight this guy. I can't even remember his name. So we fighting. Eventually some auntie from our block of flats came and she moved the hell out of us. She beat the two of us. But in fact broke up the fight and preserved my integrity and my my reputation.
Thank goodness for the auntie.
Yeah, so that was my gang career. But I mean, I think one of the main reasons I managed to avoid becoming a gangster is because firstly I was kind of supposedly one of the clever kids in class. And so the gangsters had kind of respect for you if you were clever or if you had a talent. So if you could play soccer very well, they would allow you to go and play soccer. I also kind of played guitar from a very young age, and so they respected that. So I would sometimes sit on the street corner with my guitar, playing the guitar, and the gangsters would sing along. And so they never ever could pressure me to become a gang member because they respected that I had some kind of skills that if I applied it properly, I could kind of make it in life. And so that you need to appreciate also, because sometimes you think it's the gangster thing is like, everybody must just be forced into gangsters. The guys are actually, in a weird way, they consider it of the fact that you might have some skills and you might have some talents, and you might be able to rise above that situation and then come back and actually make a difference.
Just to intervene there, just remember your train of thought. I think the gangsters of old was a little bit different in the sense that a lot of them landed up there because of the circumstances that they were in. So if there was a kid like you that shows this talent, that is the clever kid, he can play the guitar that nobody else could play at the time in any case, it was an exceptional skill. So they saw the potential and actually encouraged you to go further.
Yeah.
So the gangsters now, I suppose, a little bit different. These guys are, they hone in on that skill and they actually use it for nefarious purposes, if I can call it that. But please
no, but I mean, so what I also did was I used to, when I studied, I never used to study alone. I always had other kids studying with me, kids who were not kind of as good with academics as I was, and so I would always like study with them. There would always be 5, 6, 7 kids studying, little kind of living room in Hanover Park, and so you would kind of help them also, and that also kind of helped the guys to have some kind of respect for you. And so yes, I mean it was, I think those are the kinds of things that growing up you kind of learned, and that helped you also in the end. It was, like you said, it was tough. I mean, Hanover Park wasn't the kind of place where, in fact, sometimes you couldn't even walk from the one court to the next court, because every court had its own gang. And so if you come from this court, then you would be assumed to be a member of the gang. And so if you walk to the next court, you're walking into a rival gang's territory. And of course, as teenagers, you end up, being interested in teenage girls. And you end up wanting to visit the girls. But the girls might live a couple of streets away, a couple of blocks of flats away. And
where the other gangsters are.
And of course, you want to go visit the girl, and so you go visit the girl at your own risk.
Sure.
But as young boys, I mean, obviously, you are driven by this desire to see the girl. So, and I remember, I mean, when I lived in Hanover Park, I could run very fast, and part of it, I suppose, was because I needed to be able to get away from the gangsters. And so sometimes, I mean, you would go visit girls who lived on the other side of Hanover Park, and you would run so fast, because the argument is in your head basically that if you run, they need to run to catch up with you. If you just walk, they will be able to get you quite quickly. And so, yeah, so those kind of things also.
It is what they call skills development.
Yeah. But of course, I mean, listen, those kind of things still, you did that, but that didn't mean that I didn't get mugged and I didn't get robbed and I didn't get beaten up from time to time. Because from time to time you let your guard down and then the guys kind of get you. Yeah, but I mean, I survived. And
thank goodness for that as well.
Yeah.
Sure. The stuff. And in I know your later years, you were at Crystal High School. That's where I got to get. I think you and my sister was at the same class or whatever.
Yeah, no, we were in the same class from standard 6 right up to matric.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then also the Hanover Park Youth Movement, I think. If I'm not wrong, I think you were heavily involved there as well. And we too were up and down, and this was the story that you were telling now. We had to walk up from this thing, past all the courts, Solent Court and all that courts, right up to the terminus. And the terminus in itself was a scary place, you know. And we actually landed up there without, it was that commitment to say there's something not right here, let's go check it out, let's go see what we can make better.
But the thing about the Hanover Park Youth Movement, that kind of introduced a different element. There was the Hanover Park Youth Movement and the Hanover Park Civic Association, and then eventually there was like the UDF that came in. But the point is that what happened with your involvement in those organizations, because we were political organizations, and the gangsters in fact respected you if you were politically involved. I suppose nowadays it would be it would be completely different because a lot of the politicians are gangsters. You know?
Absolutely.
So, but I mean, so the gangsters respected you. So I remember us having 1980. Us having these meetings. 1980 was a crazy year because we boycotted just about everything under the sun. We had schools boycotts, we had bus boycotts, we had
meat boycotts,
Fatties and Monies, Roundtrees boycotts, Fatties and Monies. Anything that could be boycotted, we boycotted. But I remember us having these meetings at St. Dominic's Church in Hanover Park, and I think it was on a Wednesday night we used to have these meetings. Or it could have been a Tuesday night, but I know it wasn't a Thursday night because Thursday night is a holy night for the Muslims, so we wouldn't have the meeting on a Thursday night. So it was a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. Anyway, but so at that meeting at St. Dominic's, there would always be some gangsters who would come to the meeting, but they came to listen, to hear what the community was saying and almost like to take the line from the community. So if the community said, okay, we're going to boycott this or we're going to do this, and then they would kind of fall in line with that. But the gangsters also they allowed us to do our work. So, for instance, we would never ever have been able to go door to door in Hanover Park if we didn't have the buy-in of the gangsters. I mean, I'm not saying that the gangsters were
Yeah,
good or
not to give
anything.
them credit, but,
Yeah,
but just
but-
it was a different type of person there,
Yeah.
so to speak.
And so it was an interesting dynamic. So they came to the meeting, and a lot of the time they didn't talk. They just sat and they listened. And the once or twice when they talked, they spoke up and they said, we represent the other guys out there, and we just coming to listen, to what the community has to say. And those meetings were amazing. I mean, those meetings were packed every single week. There were hilarious things that happened in those meetings. Some of the contributions that people made. It was just like really, really funny.
And I think also, like you said, the community was involved. They actually came out, and our parents, for that matter, a lot of parents. I just take you back, and I know you know all of them. The Isaac Petersons, Trevor Armstrong. You had Mr. De Vries. We must give him recognition as well. All these guys, they were parents, but they made sure that they were at this committee meetings, helping out, guiding us, and sort of providing leadership in certain terms to us as well.
There was also somebody like Faye Sampson, Vicky Sampson.
Oh yes.
Who was at some point also, in fact, I think between her and Isaac, they kind of shared the chairmanship of the Civic Association at different times. But yeah, and our youth organization, I mean, so I ended up being the secretary of the youth. And the youth used to meet once a week at the kind of where the library was in Hanover Park. But there was a little hall there. And we used to meet every week. And we had a lot of members. Sometimes we would like have 100 people into the little hall. And we would have these little subcommittees who were supposed to organize programs. And so there was like the education and training subcommittee, which kind of did the serious programs. There was a sports subcommittee. But the sports subcommittee basically organized hikes and stuff, and some kind of soccer tournaments and so on. And then there was like a drama subcommittee, and I can't remember the other subcommittees, but like every subcommittee every week had to organize a program for the week. So we would have a meeting, talk whatever business, and then we would have some kind of activity.
Just on that, I spoke to Donovan Jurgens earlier on. And Donnie said he had a motorbike. And part of this things was that he had to organize a TV sometimes for certain shows to be played. Then he put this big TV on the back of his motorbike and carted it into this place next to the library, this little hall that we had. So it was quite
No. Listen, I mean, there were very few cars. And those of us, I mean, I ended up having a car later on. I had a little yellow Beetle, which became the people's car, which, of course, Volkswagen is the people's car. And it just became that. And so you ended up driving people to meetings, from meetings, picking up this, picking up that, all the time. And of course, you never got paid, you never even got petrol money. That was all kind of voluntary stuff that we did. And you never complained about it also. Okay?
And it was tough.
Yeah,
if you look at it, you didn't have. It was something that you had to go now organize. You had to go lend, or mom, or you had maybe a job that you maybe part-time job, but you willingly gave this. And this is one of the reasons, and I love the little show so far. In any case, is to show who you are and the contribution that you made that people don't see. They don't even ask about it because it's just a natural progression. But the amount of effort that you put in, the amount of money that you use, and I mean, I was telling somebody yesterday, he was saying, it's not about the money. And I said, yes, it's not about the money, but you still need the money to put in petrol in your car. If something breaks on your car, you need to fix it. So those little things we forget about because we've now passed it and we've gone to our democracy. But those personal sacrifices, really personal things, are forgotten as well.
Yeah. So I ended up also working at that time for for a paper called Grassroots Community Newspaper. And Grassroots it was crazy. In fact, I had started off at a paper called the Cape Herald, which was it was the place where people like myself could get work, because we couldn't get work at the Cape Times or at the Cape Argus, because the Cape Times and the Cape Argus was aimed at white people basically, and all the reporters were white, and so they would employ, maybe they would employ one colored reporter, one African reporter, but quite often they wouldn't even. And so people who looked like me and who sounded like me had to go and work at the Cape Herald, which was kind of aimed at the colored community. But the Cape Herald, I mean, we did quite well. I mean, in fact, even at the Cape Herald, when I started there, after a few months, we discovered that that us as black journalists, we were earning less than half of what the white journalists were earning with the same kind of experience and stuff. And we went on strike. And we went on strike for a whole month. And we used some of the techniques that we had learned from being in the community, because one of the things we did was we then organized a boycott of the Cape Herald. And we went to the Western Cape Traders, which was led by a person called David Khan. And we said to them, listen, don't stock the Cape Herald, or take the Cape Herald when they deliver it, but then put it under your counter. So don't put it on top of the counter, don't sell it. And so the next week they come back, and you just give them the parcel back. And most of the people in the Western Cape Traders actually did that. And so that helped us in terms of our fight with management.
It was absolutely effective as well, because yes, they're spending money now. They don't want to pay equal pay to you, but they're losing money with the sales not going on. They're printing the paper, it's not selling. So a big loss to the guys.
And eventually, I mean, so what happened was, I mean, after our strike, our salaries did go up, and we got an equity with the white journalists.
Wow.
So I mean, so my salary went up from 250 Rand to 500 Rand.
Wow.
This was 1980. That was a lot of money. Oh. It was,
and I remember the Cape Herald had a hell of a circulation. I think most of the brown people in Cape Town, if I can call it that, were actually buying the Herald. It was a very popular
the Herald
newspaper.
it was just different. I remember every Monday night, people used to go stand on the street corner and wait for the Herald trucks to come.
Wow.
And you know, so they would just buy the paper. And so the paper had a Monday edition and a Wednesday edition. The Wednesday edition was like the late sports special. So all the weekend sport was contained in the Wednesday edition. And obviously the local sport.
Wow.
And it was very huge on local sport. And still today, in fact, I mean, on Sunday, I was driving past Hanover Park I was on my way to Mitchell's Plain, and I saw these guys playing soccer and on a field in Hanover Park. And there was a huge crowd watching the game. It was amazing. It was like really, people were, I mean, obviously there was no social distancing. I was driving past, so I didn't have enough time to check whether there were any masks, but I suspect there probably weren't any masks. But the point is that the kind of the support for the game is there and has always been there.
Sure.
Okay?
Just remember what you're going to say next. I know that Ridwan Anthony, he's a big soccer guy in Nova Park, also part of the Nova Park youth and the youth movement and so on. And he's getting a lot of support with the soccer thing in Nova Park.
Yeah.
A lot of young soccer players came through his his team, as it were, and made it quite big.
No. I think Ridwan has. I mean, and you have to give him credit. I mean, he's stuck in there. He's done the hard miles in terms of looking for talent, developing talent, and hoping to create kind of opportunities for the youngsters to go on. And a lot of the youngsters, I mean, there's lots of young players who have come through from Hanover Park and they've done well. I mean, Benny McCarthy is obviously the most famous of them all, but there have been a lot of others also who have done that. But yeah, Ridwan was also part of a youth. In fact, at some point I think at some point he was chairman of the youth also. But that was the beauty of the youth. I mean, we brought together like the politicals, like myself. We brought together the people from church groups or church youth organizations. I mean, I met my friend Logan Ward there. Logan represented what was called the interchurch youth. So he came from a different kind of background. Donnie Jurgens came from a kind of a sports teachers kind of background. And all of us became friends eventually out of this youth organization and the struggle organization. And we've got friendships that still last to this day. And for me, that is the beauty also of the kind of the friendships that we forged in struggle. That's still standing. A lot of it is still standing to this day.
You were saying I just want to go back because I do this and it lands up going into a different discussion. You were saying you were passing Hanover Park and you were seeing this soccer players and without the masks that we mentioned, and it was just significant to see how much support these people still get, and the community.
But that's the thing is, I mean, amateur soccer and sports like netball have always enjoyed huge support in these communities. And part of it is because people go watch it, people don't have to pay to watch it. So it's kind of free, but also because there's a lot of talent on display, and some of the guys are very good, and so people appreciate that. And that's sad when you think about it. I mean, the fact that this phenomenon this is Hanover Park, but it's replicated all over the Cape Flats. You could go to Heideveld, you could go to Menenberg, and you would see similar scenes of sports fields with no stands, no nothing, no fence around it. There's just a sports field, and you just see people standing around.
I'm just taking you back once again. The whole discussion started around the Cape Herald and the late sports edition, and this is how we landed up with this discussion. I think part of the Cape Herald is now almost reflected in the Sawn. If you look at the Sawn and the stories they tell,
and
the voice, as it were. So, just in terms of that, do you see maybe you going back to opening? I know Max de Pree opened up his own newspaper again. I know you started off with the grassroots many years ago, and the security branch at one stage actually burned down the place, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
It was on top of not Adley Street, Plain Street, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, one of the top.
It was opposite the City Hall.
Yeah. And they actually literally burned the place down. Do you see yourself going back, maybe opening up your own little space and creating that? Is too much work? Maybe at the time now that you see.
I am looking at doing something, but it will be online because
that's the new more thing.
Well, it's cheap and it's easier to do, and it will be easy also to get contributions from people. Because what I hope to do is to create a vehicle where people will be able to tell their own stories.
Okay.
Not something where you have lots of journalists telling stories, but something where the journalists would be there, but the journalists would be helping to facilitate the telling of stories.
Fantastic. And editing, I know once I've started this thing now, and it's so amateurish. As I go along, I try to make it a little bit better, put a little bit of lights in and stuff. But like you said, it's the raw stories. It's not edited. It's not controlled. It's just telling your life, and your life is fascinating. It's the first time I hear the story of your father and the family and the Hanover Park that gave you this family. So you always have this regard for, irrespective of what's happening in Hanover Park, you'll always have this regard because that is where your family got together, you know. So these are the stories that people want to hear, and it will never be told by a journalist because they're not interested in that. They've got a specific agenda that they want to hear, and this is the nice part about the stories. Ryland, what I'd like to ask you is, who do you think in your mind played great influences in your life? Like sometimes if I take myself, you yourself was a great influence in my life. You know, a lot of Donnie Jurgens, my own brothers, my sister for that matter. So who was your influences in your life and actually supported you? I often know, I had Rishanda Pasco on yesterday. In fact, the thing is playing on the Unsung Heroes. And one funny thing she was mentioning is her dad wanted to call the security police and say there's a terrorist in my house. You know, we know that our dads were, a lot of them were actually our parents, and didn't want us to get involved because it was dangerous. The cops would pick us up and we had to be on the run. So in a way they were looking out for us. In the other way, they didn't tolerate people coming into their homes and making a mock, if you can call it that, which wasn't really the case, but I'm just saying in their minds. Who do you think played that vital role? And I know it was a gradual process, but there must have been influences in your life that brought you where you are now.
Yeah. No, listen, I think there were different people who influenced me at different times. So, you know, if you look at in Hanover Park, the amazing thing is that one of the people who actually influenced me quite a bit, and I don't think I've ever told him, is Albert Fritz. Okay? And Albert at the time was our leader in a way. When he in 1976, I was just a snotrat lady. I wasn't really interested in politics. I mean, I was more, interested in girls, and I was also interested in my schoolwork. Okay, in fact, probably more interested in my schoolwork than anything else. And 1976, after the happenings in Soweto, Albert then came around. He was at our school. He was a grade or two higher than me. I think it was standard 8, which is what, grade 10 nowadays. And it was Albert came around to our class, and it was very ironic that we were in fact having an Afrikaans lesson at the time with a teacher called Juffrou Conradi. Okay? One of these white teachers who came to teach in colored schools, and they got danger pay and they got all of these kind of things. And so they basically did because they got more money to go and teach. Anyway, so Juffrou Conradi was busy teaching us. And Albert came, and Albert asked us to address the class and spoke to the class and told them about what happened in Soweto. And said that we as a school, the next day, we are going to protest inside the school grounds. And of course, Juffrou Conradi got so angry, she ran out of the class and she went to go tell the principal. The principal, of course, it was too late for him to do anything. But I wasn't one of the kids who joined the protest initially, because I felt that I wanted to study, and so I sat in class with a few others, and we were studying, and we heard these kids singing outside, and we could hear all these noises, and we could kind of gauge where they were in the school, kind of depending on where the noise came from. And we kind of figured out that they were near the gate at some point. And then we just heard shouting, screaming, and chaos breaking out. And so what happened was the police basically broke down the gate of the school, came in and started beating up kids and going crazy. But we were still inside the class. We were still determined to study, because for us it was education first, liberation wasn't even factored into the equation in a way.
Sure.
And the next thing, one of these big, burly kind of policemen kicked open the door of our classroom. I mean, he didn't even have to because the classroom wasn't locked. Kicked open the door of the classroom and started beating. Really, and I'm going to swear now, but he started beating the shit out of us. Okay? And all of us ran out and we stayed outside.
It was more dangerous in the class in any case.
So maybe I was saying, but maybe Albert wasn't the one who influenced me. Maybe it was
the boer.
The police.
It was the boer that
who forced me to join the
Oh
struggle.
my word.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Fantastic.
So that was one person. I mean, but later on in life, I mean, and irrespective of where Albert kind of ended up in terms of his political career, I will still acknowledge that influence that he had on me. The one person who influenced me greatly in politics was Johnny Issel, who I met later when I moved to Hanover, from Hanover Park to Mitchell's Plain. And Johnny just kind of adopted me and just taught me just about everything that I kind of got to know about politics. He was a brilliant person. He was probably the best organizer that I've ever met.
Sure.
But he was strategic and he had so much knowledge in his head that was scary and that was intimidating also, because when he spoke to you, he assumed that you also knew what he knew. And of course he didn't. So Johnny influenced me a lot. And Johnny used to take us for, like Saturday mornings, we used to have these reading groups where he would give us something to read, and then the next Saturday we would come and we would discuss what we had read. And these were the hectic stuff. It was like, Lenin, what is to be done? And it was like Gramsci, and it was all these kind of things. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand a single word of what I was reading. And then we still had to go discuss it. And that was scary. But that was part of our political education. It was useful for us.
I just had to intervene. I had, that one isn't played yet. I had an interview with Austin Jackson and Rod Solomon. And Austin Jackson was sitting there. And he's a priest. I don't know if you know him. He's a friend of Michael Weeder and so on. And the strange part, those very books that you're talking about is the ones that he mentioned. And I said, oh my gosh, till today, I don't know what who the people are and what they are talking about. But this was such a sophisticated level of books. Like you said, they assume that you know what they're talking about because it was natural reading for the real academics of the struggle, And it was amazing at the time, and through our apartheid policies and our apartheid gutter education, what to call it, these guys came through and they were well educated, well read as well. And I just want to mention that there was a few of the Johnny Issels around as well, and we can appreciate them because we were not at that level where they were. They were a step ahead of us in many ways.
Yeah. And you must also remember, we were kids, we grew up speaking Afrikaans. We grew up being taught in Afrikaans. We kind of took a decision at some point, after 76, particularly in my case, took a decision that I wanted to speak English. And it's difficult at that point in your life, 16, 17 years old, to kind of change your first language. And then obviously these books were also just in English. But they were not just in English, they were like English of a different kind of level, as you say, with words like petty bourgeoisie, which we never knew what it meant,
Absolutely.
And proletariat.
You take me back now. I think I was in standard 8, grade 10, and I was started off with a big Das Kapital, introduced to bourgeoisie and proletariat. And half the time I didn't know, and this book was thick. Yes, in today's terms, it's a double volumes,
Das Kapital is but then I also had a stint where I was kind of, where some of the guys, and there was a guy called Ryland particularly, who was like Unity Movement, and they also kind of tried to take me under their wing, and they introduced me to other literature, Teachers League of South Africa Literature, where they talked about the Herenvolk, and they talked about collaborators, and they talked about Koezlings, and stuff like that. Words which a simple youngster from Hanover Park just didn't understand. It was just way above me. But in any case, you learn, and you were forced to understand what these words meant, and then eventually you also end up using these words in your conversations, and I suppose that's kind of a sign of your own kind of progression in a way also.
Ryland, you shook hands with the biggest and the greatest of people, and one comes to mind immediately, and it's Nelson Mandela, Dennis Goldberg, the people of the Rivonia Trialists. All you basically shook hands with them. And I know that you wrote a book on them, edited the book, and so on. What was that? How did that feel? I mean, that must have been your ultimate. I don't know. You had so many things and accolades and so on, but that must be one of your many achievements and prides that you have.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest, not achievements, but I mean one of the things that still gives me the greatest joy was the fact that I was editor of the Cape Times at the time when Nelson Mandela was president, and so I was fortunate to have many interactions with him during that time. One-on-one interactions, little dinners at his house, bigger interactions. I invited him to come and visit us at Newspaper House, and he accepted. And so he was just the most amazing person. And I don't care what people say, the people who kind of try to revise history. Nelson Mandela was a great person, and he was way ahead of his time, and probably would still be ahead of his time. But they were a different generation of leaders, like, so your Dennis Goldbergs and your Walter Sisulus and your Ahmed Katsadas and your Governor Bekis and the Bulangenis, those kind of guys, they were just different. They were committed first and foremost to the people. Okay, that was the thing that drove them. They didn't look for personal glorification. They didn't look for positions. When Mandela was the face of the Robben Islanders, but even that was a discussion that they took, a decision that they took kind of collectively, and they decided, okay, that they would focus on Mandela because it's easier to focus on one person, and to kind of, to fight for the release of one person as opposed to an anonymous group of people, because people kind of identify with this person, and so that was the decision. But Mandela, when he came out, he wasn't in the leadership of the ANC. He was just an ordinary ANC member, and they then created the position of deputy president for him, to Oliver Tambo, who was obviously the president. But it wasn't like a thing. Up to that point, the ANC never had a deputy president, but they used to sometimes, in fact, one of the things that Dennis Goldberg told me was when he was there when Mandela met Tambo for the first time after his release, and he said the first thing that Tambo said to him was, "I've looked after the ANC. I'm ready to hand it over to you. Please continue to look after it." I mean,
and it's selfless, basically selfless.
Yeah, there's no like, this is my organization. I built up this organization. I looked after this organization through all the years in exile.
And not only that, if I'm going to be a little bit controversial in a sense, is that when it's your time to give up, you still want to go on. Yep. You've had 2 terms, and then you still want a 3rd term. You want to change the constitution to actually still lead. These guys had 1 term and say, "Listen, man, it's time to. I've got decent leadership that's following. I've mentored them. They know the ideas. They know, like you said, they're there for the people. They are ready to take over and lead."
Yeah.
And these type of leadership that we have now is the leadership where, not right now, I cannot say from I love my current president, but the previous ones, they tend to have had this notion that they are the best and they need to lead. The people cannot lead on their own. They haven't trained people to take over from them and carry on their legacy, as it were. They wanted to be the legacy. And that is the difference between those selfless leaders that we had and the ones that followed after them.
Well, I mean, I think there's lots of difference, but I think the one thing is the fact that these people, they were interested in serving the people. That was the main thing. They weren't really interested in their own kind of positions and enriching themselves. And I suppose that's where we kind of went wrong in a big way. And where we've kind of gone off the rails in the last 26 years and a bit.
Ryland, if I can, because this thing is I think we're busy almost for an hour, so it's gonna sort of go on to the next slide. If I may ask, do you think that we as youth, obviously we can't change the past, and I just ask this, there's no right or wrong answers, could we have done things a little bit differently? Could we have maybe followed a different path? Maybe, I don't know, I'm asking you, I'm putting it out, and I put it out to all my guests that I have. It's just to see what role we could have played differently.
You know, the thing is, hindsight is very good. It's a great thing, but hindsight means nothing. I always say to people, even when people say to me, you know, like if you look at, say, somebody like Biko, what would Biko say today? It's difficult because Biko isn't around today. Okay. Yes, I know what Biko would have said. If I have to base Biko's sayings on what he said in 1976, then I can tell you what he would have said. But he might have changed his mind. Okay. So that's the one thing. The second thing is that, yes, we all made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I think the one mistake that we made was that we thought that we achieved freedom in 1990 when the ANC wasn't banned, and we consolidated our freedom in 1994 when we voted. Of course, that isn't true. I mean, it was almost, for me, in many ways, the struggle only began there, you know. Yes, we got political freedom, but the bigger freedom that we need is economic freedom, which the majority of our people just don't have. And so that is a problem. And that's the one thing. So when we kind of thought that we had achieved freedom, a lot of us kind of stepped aside and we welcomed back our leaders who came from exile. The problem is that we forgot that we had actually become the leaders, that the people understood us more and we understood the people a lot more than the people who had been in exile for 30 years. They'd become completely out of touch with what was happening in South Africa. And they operated differently. In exile, you kind of operate top down, you give a direction or a director from the top, and you send it down, and then everybody just implements. Here in South Africa, at home basically, we operated bottoms up, okay? So we kind of, we took our direction from the people on the ground. We discussed and we discussed and we discussed. At grassroots, we had this weird phrase. We said that we were democracy. Because yes, we were.
Yes.
We were obsessed with democracy to the point that it took over our lives. I mean, every decision we made was kind of thoroughly workshopped. And in that way, you got everybody's input and buy-in into every decision.
Ryland, just to butt in there again, I had this interview, and I don't know, it's on now, and I encourage you to actually have a listen to it as well, with Henrietta Abrams. And what they're doing now, they forming the street committees, and which was the old type of, like your democracy type of ideas, where you had street committees and you had a representative of your street, and they come to the youth and they represent you because the people have voted for them. And further than that, she says what they've implemented is that you don't stand there forever. You're there for a year or two, and people can vote you back in or vote you out if it comes to that, if you're not there for the interest of the community or the street that you're in. So that was the kind of democracy that we had those years, and that we were just expecting to get when the exiles came. And like you said, there was a different dynamic. They gave orders and they expected to follow. And I'm going to take you just a little bit further. In the ANC camps, for instance, there's a lot of stories that are coming out of there. And I just had somebody connecting me with somebody that was actually in one of the camps, and he was a prisoner in the camp. And I must actually just get hold of them. But anyway, that's going to be in the discussion a little bit in the future to see what happened. And like you said, it was a top-down approach. People come in, you're the leader of intelligence, listen, take this man away or whatever is suspicious, which was not even the case. Maybe, I don't know, I wasn't there. Maybe under the circumstances, I would have done maybe something similar, because you just could trust nobody. But what I'm saying is that it was a total different dynamic. You know, it wasn't the same struggle that we had, and like, if I don't even want to separate it, but that they had. You know, it was two different dynamics. But at the end of the day, look, we've achieved a lot. I don't want to put it past the people that be. We have achieved a lot, but like I said, there wasn't total emancipation of the people, because people are still living in Manenberg. People are still struggling to get food. You know, there's still floods in Kailicha, for instance, and all the black people are in Kailicha, all the brown people are in Manenberg. So that dynamics should have changed. You know, we should have been more proactive with those type of things. And I don't want to take over the discussion. Just in closing, I just want to say that you've done an absolute fantastic job, and I've followed you over the year. I was a big fan of you. I was a little kid when I first met you. You were one of the leaders that I looked up to. You know, I was a Ryland Fisher. He's got his own grassroots. You know, I was really proud of that fact that somebody that I knew and that was from Hanover Park could achieve those things. And I think a lot of youngsters looked up to you to say, like you said, you wanted to be that leader where people could really say, look what Rylands have achieved, you know. And I know, I'm just bringing in a little bit of your family. I know that your daughters are into the arts. One is a singer, one is an artist as well. And it's fantastic. And like I said, if things didn't change, those opportunities would have been there. So there was some good with the bad, and we have to accept that. Ryland, just in closing, would you like to just say something just to close off our discussion?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, you know, sometimes we focus on the bad and we forget the good. And the good is that there has been some things that have come with our democracy, that is, some of our people have been uplifted, opportunities have opened up. So I'll tell you a little story. A few years ago, I went to Crystal to go speak to the matriculants. And so they had invited past matriculants also. So there were people from different years and stuff. So it was quite a big gathering in the hall, which we never had. We never had a hall when we were at Crystal. We just had the prefab building.
And the big one with Tom.
But anyway, so I spoke and I spoke about how when I was growing up, we couldn't be whatever we wanted to be. We could become teachers or preachers or maybe accountants and so on. There were one or two people who could actually become doctors if they, you know, kind of managed to get the money to study. But even with all those things, like there were permits and stuff, and it was very difficult for us to study. And I said, you know, I wanted to become a pilot. That's what I've always wanted to become. But I couldn't become a pilot because only white people could become pilots. And so I never became a pilot. And some people are saying to me, yeah, maybe you can still become a pilot, and maybe I will. I still love flying. And after I spoke, a guy came up to me and he said to me, I'm so-and-so and I'm from this year, matriculated at Crystal, and I just came to tell you that I'm at SAA and I'm training to become a pilot.
Wow.
And I almost cried because this guy was living the dream that I had. And that for me, again, just brought home to me the reality of how our society has changed. Okay? That we can, opportunities are open. Quite often we just don't know about these opportunities, and maybe there needs to be a little bit more education around that. But I mean, there are the National Financial Aid Scheme for Students, which is available, but which a lot of students in the Western Cape just don't use because they don't know about it. And that's been flagged from the people at the head office of NAFSAS that it is a problem. They want more kids from the Western Cape to actually make use of the opportunities. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to, as people who might have access to information or resources, we need to share with youngsters also, so they can actually use those opportunities, so that they can become the president or a pilot or whatever they want to become in life.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something extremely important, is that with the right education, anybody can become president. And that for me is critical. We shouldn't be told or blocked into the sense that somebody of a particular culture or place or religion cannot become president of our country. It must be so that anybody will feel free to become and campaign for president, which we've allowed through the democracy. But with our thinking and stuff, we've blocked ourselves off. No, we can't stand for that. But like you said, with the right education, with the right leadership, and with the right mentorship, anybody, the field is literally open for anybody to become anything that they want, including, like you said, this chap that is doing the pilot training program at SAA. It is fantastic to know that at least we've come that far. Thank you, Ryland. Thank you so much. I know you were saying that you've got another appointment. I'm sure that you're going to be late for this. But these stories cannot even be told in an hour and a half. We've now gone on to the second clip of our part, and it's fantastic. It is fantastic. It is stories that is deep in the heart. It's a phase of unremembering those things or we're remembering those things that have been unremembered. In Busak's words, I must say that it was Alan that said that we have accepted that we've unremembered certain events of the UDF, of the activism that we had while we were growing up. And this is part of that remembering, and you were part of that. Thank you so much. And on behalf of my audience and of South Africa, I suppose, I must thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.